Thanks everybody for being here bright and early this morning. What I want to spend the next hour or so speaking about is really kind of foundational, and hopefully it's a good feeder for the rest of the day. The idea that knowledge management has been around for a really long time. I mean, show of hands, how many people have been in the industry for over 20 years? Over 30 years, anybody? All right, awesome, good. So, as many of you likely know, KM's been through some rough times. There have been years upon years and advisors upon advisors who have suggested that I change my career because KM doesn't work. KM's got a bad rap. Oh, everybody's been burnt by KM before, even if you like this stuff, really, it doesn't stick within organizations. It's the first thing that gets cut when there's a hard time in budgets. But the reality is that KM is more critical than it's ever been. It's more important to organizations than I think it's ever been for a number of reasons that I'm going to establish. So this is me, that handsome devil up there. I would really love for everybody to go ahead and tweet. Feel free to take pictures, start conversations online. I think we're using the hashtag for the entire show of hashtag KMShow18. And that's my Twitter and that's my company's. Just a little bit on EK, we're about 25 people. We're based in Arlington, Virginia, right outside of DC. We work globally. We've done work in 18 countries over the last year. So we've got some really cool stories about how KM works and how it matters that we're going to try to share with you, not just during this session, but over the course of the day. Claire Brody, one of my colleagues, is speaking about KM and design thinking at the end of the day. Joe's talking about Agile. We're talking about ontologies. We got a few others. So hopefully you'll see some themes woven between them. What we're really going to focus on is first of all, just a clean definition of knowledge management. If you Google what is KM, you get a lot of different answers. So we're going to start with what EK's definition is, and what you're going to find there is that it's a little broader than most. We really talk about knowledge and information management as an entire spectrum. I don't think you can do one well without doing the other well, and they are absolutely two sides of the same coin. So we'll establish that concept. We'll talk about some of the core business challenges that KM can really address and put these in pure English terms. As I kind of started right off with, one of the reasons KM has had its struggles is that it's hard to explain the value of KM. And so if I get too jargony up here, it's your job to call me on it. Everything that you should hear should be terms that you can go back to your CEO and say, this is why we need this. Should be things that you can take to your business users and explain, this is why you should listen and why you should participate. And then we'll talk a little bit about EK's approach. We've established a benchmark system that allows an organization to be rated based on about 30 factors of knowledge management maturity. Whether you use that or not, I think that the components of it are really valuable to how we talk about KM, how we think about it, how we move organizations from here to there. And the real thesis statement there is one of the biggest reasons I hear organizations haven't met the KM challenge head on is that they can't get their arms around it. They don't know where to start, and they try to just do everything at once. And so the point here is going to be some tools about how to segment KM, how to deconstruct it, how to put it into chewable chunks so that it doesn't feel so scary, so onerous, and instead it's something that we say, hey, we might not have the massive budget, we might not know where we're going to be in 3 years, but what can we do now? So you'll see some Agile themes here, but this is very much an iterative approach and a segmented concept to taking this big picture, understanding it all, but then deciding what little piece you want to do first, which allows you to do the next little piece and the next and the next until you're actually making some real progress. So the one time I'm going to read off of a slide, I promise, this is our definition. KM involves the people, process, culture, and enabling technologies necessary to capture, manage, share, and find information. So let's unpack this a little bit. First and foremost, people, process, culture, and technologies. You'll notice that we list technologies last. One of the biggest mistakes that gets made in KM efforts is that you make it all about the technology. You say, we're going to give you a search. We're going to give you this fancy new shiny tool called an ontology, whatever that is. We're going to give you the big content management system you've been asking for. These things happen without asking the question of what do your users need? What are their pain points? What are the challenges that exist today that we're going to address by doing this thing? KM and technology are not the same thing. There are often, frequently, technology components as enabling factors to effective knowledge management. But you can do KM all by yourself without a computer in the room. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We talk in terms of verbs. Everything that we do in knowledge management should be put in terms of actions that we're trying to inspire for our business users, for our end users. So when we use words like capture, manage, share, and find, that's our effort to break down all of the complexities of KM to some pretty simple concepts, which is you have a job to do. We want to give you the right knowledge, the right information, and the right functionality in certain cases to be able to get that job done as easily, as completely, as cleanly, as comprehensively as possible. So a lot of times when I'm talking about the value of KM, I'm talking about getting something done better and faster so you can get home and have a beer or play with your kids or drink a beer while you're playing with your kids. Whatever it might be, it comes down to this concept of time saved, productivity. One of my favorite phrases is that happy employees are good at KM. Well, happy employees are the ones who are empowered by their company, who feel supported by their company, who are given the right information in order to do their job effectively. And so all of this stuff fits together. Now, this is a sentence. Obviously, KM goes a lot deeper, so let's dig into it a little bit. But this is where we always begin. Where we go from there is what some of you might have seen before. We love pulling out our KM action wheel. And this is, in a way, taking those concepts of verbs to the next level. The idea that when we are planning or strategizing or talking about knowledge management, we want to begin by asking a really core question or two. What is it that you wish you could do that you can't? What is it that you wish you could do easier that's hard? And a lot of times, the answers that we get back fall within this realm. Well, I wish it was easier to create my knowledge, to take what's in my head and put it into a system that others could benefit from it. Or I wish it was easier to take that presentation that I spent a ton of time on and put it in a place that others could benefit from it and share what I learned there. Those are great examples of either tacit knowledge becoming explicit or explicit knowledge becoming shared explicit knowledge. The idea that, and again, I'm going to get really technical here, you've got a bunch of stuff. Your stuff might be up here or it might be in there, but it doesn't do anyone any good unless it's in a place where it's easy for it to be found. And so in order for it to be found, it has to be captured in a way that is easy and intuitive. Now, people don't share their stuff if it's hard to share it. It's why email is so pervasive in every organization. It is really easy, and habits have been formed around sharing a document by attaching it to an email and sending it on its merry way. Email, of course, is where knowledge goes to die, because nobody reads all of their emails, and even if you read it once, it goes to the bottom of the box or it gets deleted, or like most organizations, there are now archive policies and you can only have a certain number of emails over a certain period of time. So all this great stuff gets lost. How many of you have been in a situation where you know you have answered a question via email before, but you find yourself re-answering the question, maybe even to the same person, right? I'm looking at you, Claire, I know. So this whole idea that we're spending all of this time translating our tacit knowledge to explicit, but putting it in a format where it just evaporates over time. It gets lost. So it's not just about capturing it, it's about capturing it in a means where others will be able to then manage and enhance and find it in ways so knowledge gets better and richer over time. So management, pretty common term, right? Content management, knowledge management, that's why we're all here. But let's really think about what it takes to do that well and easily. It's not just about sticking your stuff somewhere. If it were, everybody would like SharePoint. It is, instead, about taking your knowledge and having easy means to direct it to the right people, describe it in ways that the appropriate people can find it naturally and easily. And that word enhance is so important. What's the point of capturing knowledge if it doesn't get better over time? What happens with most organizations in our studies is we've done content analyses. We've found that in your average internet and your average file drive, about 80% of the content there is obsolete, old, outdated, wrong, duplicate. And so think about how much easier it would be to find the right stuff, how much better search would work simply by clearing away the 80% of junk. So non-technical solution, just get rid of all your junk and all of a sudden your haystack is much smaller. You've got a much more workable starting point. But when we're talking about enhancement, we're not just talking about tagging it appropriately and putting it in the right place. We're also talking about the fact that knowledge itself becomes richer as more people collaborate upon it. So we're working with the National Park Service. Do we have anybody from the Park Service? So we have built for them what they've tagged the Common Learning Portal, CLP, because of course it's a government agency, they need to make it an acronym. So within the Common Learning Portal, we've created a means by which they can capture their structured learning, they can share their unstructured knowledge, various files, and they can also participate in communities of learning and communities of practice. And all of this fits together on the same topics. Now, the coolest thing about this is what they found is that everyone gravitated towards the social knowledge, the communities of learning and practice. The reason was that they were a disconnected organization, highly geographically distributed, folks at the end of the trail, so to speak. And we see this, even if you're not out in the middle of the Grand Canyon, we see this more and more in organizations, that people are separated. And so the Park Service gravitated towards this ability not just to capture their knowledge, but to interact with each other's knowledge, to ask questions of experts, and to share ideas and concepts that they'd been doing, but they'd been doing with the two other trail guides next to them, not the world of Park Service rangers. And so, though all of the components of the Common Learning Portal have been valuable, what has been the most enticing to the actual end users was the idea that they could take a course or a file, and they could comment on it, and they could ask questions about it, and they could have experts say what they liked and what they didn't like and tweak it. And this evolution of knowledge has become the thing that is really the anchor of this system. There's no magic about it. I mean, everybody has intranets and portals and different tools, but for them, the idea that they had an easy means to take all of their stuff and make it better and richer over time, the actual content improved, and the usage has spiked on this system because people finally had a way to connect with their colleagues, that one up there, and learn from each other. So recognize that this entire wheel, though there are individual segments, tells a cohesive story. And at any point in the day, an individual user may choose or want or gravitate towards any of these actions. These all fit together to do the thing that's in the middle, act. So where do we begin KM? We begin, again, by saying, what is it you want to do? So people are going to kind of default the answer, right? Oh, I want to be able to get answers to my questions. I want to be able to learn from my colleagues. But when you start pulling that string, you start getting really incredible user stories or use cases around how people want to do that. The specific types of information they wish they had easier access to. The cool ideas they have that they wish they could share. And as we begin telling these KM stories, something that seemed like, oh, it's just a portal, it's a piece of technology, really becomes a complete KM concept. Telling these stories, understanding how your users want to be able to act but are potentially currently stymied, is what takes your average project to something that will stick even when you leave or step away. And that is the core of what we want to get across here. Now, I mentioned earlier that knowledge and information management, from our perspective, really exist on the same spectrum. So here it is. I have participated in way too many roundtable discussions about, well, where does KM stop and where does information management begin? That is where you drive me to drink. So please, let's not have that conversation. What we want to talk about is not what's what. What we want to talk about is the fact that all of this fits together. And again, that Park Service example is a great story, right? Because it is the full spectrum of creating a format where people can take what's in their head and get it into a system where others can interact with it, but that they can also respond to, Ben, right, first row right here. Come on in. Ben Licciardi, everyone. Come on in. Can take that tacit knowledge, interact with it in such a way that it becomes explicit, and then can link it to those files and other documents and data that they possess to tell a complete and concrete story. And that is where we see that top line represented, knowledge and information management. The second line, tacit to explicit. So I mentioned earlier that you don't need technology to do KM. Some of the coolest ways that KM happens is this. We're talking to each other. We're looking at each other. We're sitting around round tables. We're doing lunch and learns. We're doing brown bag sessions. We're just creating means by which we can interact more naturally around topics and learning and ideas and concepts. That's great KM. And sometimes it's the stickiest stuff because you do really well when you know each other. If you care about somebody, you're going to support them. When they ask questions, I like this person, I want to help them, of course I'm going to answer. And so the social and human aspect to KM is really important. But we also slide all the way across the room to the idea that a lot of what we're trying to do is take the stuff up here and get it into a place where even if somebody isn't in the same room, if they're on the other side of the world, they can asynchronously still get that answer to their question. They can take the expertise that I possess and leverage it when they need it, at the point of need, not just when I'm available to pick up the phone or be in the room with them. So I should go back just a little bit. I think everybody probably has a good sense of the tacit versus explicit concept, but let me explain this briefly in the way that I know best, which involves food. So we travel a lot for work, and one of the things that I always like to do is take advantage of going to a new city and trying a really good restaurant in the city. So one of the ways that I might do that is when I get into my Uber, is ask the Uber driver, what's your favorite place to eat? And that basically is the process that he's taking the stuff up here and he is directly transferring it to me. That is tacit knowledge that I'm receiving. I might also, in advance of the trip, go and Google and find a bunch of blogs about great food in Milwaukee. It's all cheese, by the way. And if that's the case, that's an example of explicit knowledge, because it's concrete, it's digital, it's there, but it's unstructured, right? There's a bunch of different files, and I kind of pull the best from each. And yet, I could go even further and say, or maybe I go to OpenTable and I filter on the best restaurants with the best rankings in the price range that I want. That's explicit too, and it's structured. So this full range, again, from KM to IM, all are ways that I can complete my action that I wanted, which is putting food in my stomach, but doing it in such a way that I am benefiting from all the different types of knowledge and information that can help me complete that mission. So that at its core is why all of this matters and why considering it all together becomes so powerful. Now, the other piece to this is a recognition that times have changed. I've got more gray in my beard than I used to. And this summer, my lawnmower broke. What did I do? Anyone? Okay, good. So everybody's paying attention. Yes, I had a beer. I was already having one. I ended up buying a new one. But the first thing I did, I Googled it, tried to fix it myself by watching a YouTube video. So learning at the point of need, knowledge in what one of my clients lovingly calls nano-learning particles, which is a funky way of saying people don't learn just by going to a 5-day class that they're sitting there and being lectured at. That's That is a way that people learn, but it's a way they learn where studies say that you only retain about 10 to 20% of what you've actually heard over that period. Whereas if you're learning at the point of need, if you're pulling up the phone and with beer in one hand and phone in the other, you're saying, okay, my lawnmower is making a choking noise, how do I fix it? Then you get to watch that video, you get to learn, and then you get to do something about it. Now again, I'm not that handy, so I did end up buying a new lawnmower just to complete the story. But the concept is there, that we now have more technology, more means, more bandwidth, more tools that create an opportunity for us to capture different types of knowledge and share it in ways that didn't even exist a few years ago. And so as we consider the knowledge and information management spectrum, we also want to consider all of the types of knowledge and information that are at our fingertips and could be at our fingertips. And so as knowledge managers, as information professionals, we don't just want to do that traditional content analysis of, oh, you've got 10 million files, let's put them in good order and clean out the old stuff. We also want to ask the bigger question of what are the other ways that people want to be able to consume knowledge, what are the other ways they want to be able to learn, and how can we incrementally start taking our 500-page policies and chunking them up, transferring some of that to a video format or a graphic or different means by which people can consume and learn and act as a result. Still making sense? All right. So let's talk a little bit about challenges. I've used this slide before, so repeat customers, sorry, but I really like this one, so I wanted to keep it here. One of the reasons we have such a burning need for KM today is right up there, these concepts. More geographic distribution. How many companies have a virtual work policy? Right, so you're seeing your colleagues less. And as we all know, technology is cool, but another show of hands, how many of you have had a failed video conference experience over the last month? Yeah, right, so we just had a good one yesterday. It's kind of shameful to be kind of in IT and not be able to make a telecon work, and I'm always embarrassed by it, but I admit it, and admitting it is the first step. Less structure. So Gardner has a long-standing statistic that 80% of knowledge within your average organization is unstructured, meaning that it's those individual files and emails and the stuff that's floating around. As social becomes more prevalent, that number is skyrocketing. And there's a corollary to this, which I use the term, there's been a democratization of content management. If we go back a couple decades, there were very few people within the organization that were digital creators of content. It used to be hard to publish a file on the intranet. It used to be hard to take a piece of paper and make it be something that would be online. Now it is, if anything, too easy. Again, reference SharePoint. The reason that everybody in this room has at one point or the other muttered the term SharePoint sucks under their breath is not because SharePoint is necessarily a bad tool, but because it's too easy to get stuff into it. And so as a result, we're dealing with a situation where bad content, garbage in, garbage out, is flowing. And as we create the world of social content, it's amazing and it's powerful, and everybody is a content manager and everybody is a publisher, but it also creates way more knowledge. Another statistic, I think this is Gardner again, I've got it on the next slide, but the statistic is that every 3 to 4 months, the amount of content within an organization doubles. So let that sink in for a second. Every 3 to 4 months, your needle in a haystack is having another haystack dropped on top of it. Your ability to find that one answer to your one question becomes twice as hard, right? Every time you have to swim past a bunch of seaweed to get to that thing, it's a harder experience. It's more difficult. It's more time consuming, which is the exact opposite of what it should be. So we're in a situation where you are looking at your colleagues less, you are dealing with more content of more types, and yet at the same time, everybody's being asked to do more with less. And so in age, especially federal, anybody from the government here? Yeah, we don't like this phrase too much, do we? I'm tired of it too. Do more with less. Budgets being cut. There is a risk that KM gets paid short shrift. And so your mission is to internalize the fact that KM is a cost saver because it's a time saver. It is a resource saver because it allows for greater learning, greater upscaling of newer employees, greater knowledge retention by having your more tenured employees sharing what they're learning before they walk out the door. KM is business critical, and these are several of the reasons why. And again, here are the statistics. I'm not going to read them all off, but again, for the govies in the room, I will note that one. 10,000 people retiring every day, which means that 10,000 people are walking away with that tacit knowledge in their head. Everybody has these stories. We do a lot of work with the General Services Administration. Anybody here from GSA? And the stories that we keep getting from the most tenured employees are really typical of what we hear really across the board, not just in federal agencies, but commercial as well. The idea that I am the one person that knows where that blueprint is. I am the one person who knows why that decision was made. And when I leave, that knowledge will forever be lost because I am not picking up the phone when you call. So there is a burning need, now more than ever, to ensure that what those people know, what they've forced themselves to learn over decades of service, gets maintained, gets transferred. This is something that we've been talking about for 20 years now, and it is really coming to a head. And so as we talk about why KM matters now, is that we're out of time. The boomers are retiring now. Knowledge is being lost every day. Now, let's play a little game. Let's do show of hands for some of these phrases. How many of you have either uttered or heard the phrase, "I can't find my stuff"? Yeah, that's a good one. How about well, we were just talking about it. Suffering from the brain drain. We're losing all of our knowledge. Yeah, okay, not a popular one. That's okay. We'll try again. How about this? KM in general. We've done this before. It didn't work. We've been burnt by this. We invested in this a few years ago. It didn't stick. Nobody wanted to do it. Right? All of these are phrases that we hear a lot. And a lot of times it's the call where we say, we know what the problem is, but we don't know how to move the needle on it. Yeah, if we had all the money in the world, we'd buy the fancy appliance and we'd do this and that, but we just don't know how to get started. So I think there's a huge awareness of the challenges, and at the C level, this is the stuff that, as we talk to executives, especially on the commercial side, this is the stuff that's keeping them up at night. Because on that side of the house, this is money lost. This is the cost of training a new employee because they lost the person that they should have cared for. This is the cost of losing a customer because they failed to connect the fact that that customer had bought 3 different products and they tried to resell the customer something they'd already bought. This is the cost of being able to maintain the organization's own knowledge, and so they're recreating work that they've already done but simply weren't aware of or couldn't find again. We can put all of this in terms of lost productivity, lost revenues. On the federal side, it's harder to do that sometimes, right? But you still have that concept of lost productivity that is absolutely central to why KM matters. Now, the other way that I like to think about this, and this is the colors came through a little weird on that. I'm going to have to mime this for y'all instead. The way that we often start thinking about this is once we know what one of the core challenges is, findability, we get to look at all of the different options to address that. And this is just a small subset, and some of them are in white, so trust me, they're there. But the concept here, the idea is that we can start deconstructing the many ways that we can potentially solve or start to solve the findability challenge. And again, these range from non-technical to technical, and you see just a few examples of them on the screen. The idea here, and Claire's going to talk about design thinking and the ideation phase later in the day, is that there is no one solution for KM. There is no one thing that you can do. There are, in fact, a myriad of different options, ranging from the thing you can do in a week, like scheduling a brown bag session where your most senior employee is talking about a topic that he or she cares about, to a longer-term implementation of a fancy new search engine that involves ontologies and connects all your different types of knowledge together in different ways. These things can range from very small to very big. What's cool about them is, just like the knowledge and information management spectrum, they too fit on a spectrum. The little things are foundational to the bigger things. They prove out the value of KM, they get people invested, they get people learning, they get people asking for more. And so as we mature our knowledge management, we start small, and it allows us the opportunity to build. Oh, there it is. See? There you go. There's some different options for you. So as we go through this entire spectrum, you see there are some really simple things that you can do. Yeah, let's get a non-technical review session together to see whether content has been written in a way that's easily readable and that our search engine is going to be able to pick it up. That would not take a lot of work. It wouldn't take a lot of effort. You can do it incrementally. You don't need to do it enterprise-wide. But as you move forward, you see that these things are harder and bigger and more onerous, scarier in a lot of ways. So as we begin to think about the full menu of different solutions, recognize that you don't need to start with that big, scary thing. You can start small, and you can build from there. So I want to spend the remainder of the time really talking about how this goes. Now, again, we've already established this. How many folks would describe themselves as a KM being your kind of core job or full-time? Right. And so this is why EK is buying drinks at the end of the day, because KM is hard, and we need support in order to be able to get through the day sometimes. Knowledge management, for all the reasons I already established, and there they are again, is difficult. In order to chip away at that challenge, we want to focus on a clean strategy. The way that we often begin engagements, when I get that call that I mentioned that says we think we know what our problems are, but we don't know where to begin, we don't know how to go, this is how we begin to break it down. First and foremost, do you know where you are? And there's a big difference between thinking you know where you are and actually knowing where you are. I think one of the biggest mistakes that KMers make is that they assume they actually know what their business users are thinking and doing without asking them, observing them, embracing them in that challenge to really establish the current state. So we always begin these engagements by thinking about this in terms of what's going on. I am sure things are working within your organization. They might be working at an incremental level. They may be working only in one group or one division, but good KME things are happening for you. Do you know what those are, as well as the big challenges, the blockers, the things that are wasting people's time and creating frustration? Next, we talk about the target state. So a lot of organizations get a little confused at this point because we begin to envision what KM could look like within their organization. And again, we're doing this based on people, process, content, culture, and technology, the 5 work streams that we really consider. And I think everybody has their version of that. These are ours, and I'll explain them in a little more detail in a couple slides. But a lot of organizations get puzzled by us talking about a target state when that target state might be 2 or 3 years down the line. We hear things like, well, 2 or 3 years down the line, everything's going to be different. So why are we even talking about that? We have problems now that we need to solve. Or sometimes we hear, we're probably going to be sold or merged or be completely reorged within a couple years. So it doesn't really make sense for us to think that far out. But the reality is, what we're trying to do here is create a vision for what KM could be within the organization so that every one of those little incremental steps builds towards a real goal. If you're trying to build a KM roadmap, you can't do it if you don't know where you're going. Now, it might be that by the time you get there, things have changed. The business priorities have changed. The organizational entities have changed. The drivers have changed. The budget is probably going to change. That's okay, because if you build the right roadmap, it's going to be incremental, and you will have shown value every step of the way. You will have learned every step of the way, which will allow you to pivot and focus on the things that matter more, shift as the organizational priorities shift, but also maintain the support of the business users that you need in order to get this right. All of this, all of it, lives and dies with understanding and support from the business users. One of my favorite stories is one of the federal agencies with whom we've been working the last few years. We did a full KM strategy and roadmap, and we're in the second year of implementing these different pieces of it. And the CIO on down basically said, our budget's getting cut, we need to look at which programs. And our business stakeholders lined up and they said, take anything but this. This was the one project where they had been involved, where they were steering the ship, and they protected it. That is the greatest hallmark of any project. So if we can do that with knowledge management, we can do it in a way that the users are driving it. So defining that target state created that vision for them. They shaped it, and it allowed them to understand and really market to their colleagues what we could do if we're able to start moving down this path. Now, one of the tools that we use to really paint this picture I mentioned earlier is a benchmark, and I'll explain more about that in a bit. A lot of organizations have a version of this. Ours, again, we take our 5 categories and we've broken them up into over 30 rateable factors, 1 to 5 Likert scale, where we can basically say, are you behind the curve, are you about average, or are you ahead of the curve? Now, there are some factors that aren't that critical for some organizations, so we set them aside, but the reason that we think this is such a powerful tool is that it allows us to communicate KM up in a way that the C-levels, the leaders, the folks that are holding budget really understand. We are behind the curve. We are behind our competitors in these 7 key KM factors. So let's put some investment and some effort into those, and as a result, and here's the key part, as a result, we will be able to do these things. So that last bit, again, is what matters most. As a result, the actions we will inspire within our business users are these. Being able to talk in business outcomes is where KM succeeds. Finally, the roadmap. Everybody's got one of those, so we'll give you a couple examples, but move forward. Now, I talked earlier about deconstructing knowledge management. This is how we do it. We talk about people, process, content, culture, and technology. Briefly, people is an understanding of the eaters and feeders within your organization. Who are the experts who are feeding knowledge to the organization? Who are the consumers of that knowledge? How does knowledge flow throughout the organization? By the way, to be clear, you can be an eater on one topic and a feeder on another, right? So this is an extremely rich mapping of where within the organization information really exists. This is a great understanding, especially for geographically distributed organizations or field-based organizations. We're working with an insurance company right now, and over half their staff isn't within their headquarters or even within a real building. They're out in the field every day. Their greatest expertise is driving around the countryside. So if that's where the knowledge is being held, how do we extract that, pull that forward so that everybody else can learn from it? From a process perspective, this is probably the least exciting element of KM and yet one of the most critical. Governance, creating workflows, understanding how tacit knowledge can become explicit knowledge, understanding how the work that 10 people do together can be blessed by the organization to ensure that it's the right way, that should be shared in the appropriate manner, and that others can trust it. Content as a whole, I already mentioned the fact that you probably need no more than 20% of what you've actually got out there. So this is about understanding the greatest value that you possess and boiling that up to the top, creating mechanisms so that good content becomes better over time and bad content goes far, far away. Culture, really understanding whether an organization has a natural inclination to share knowledge, and by the way, not all do. Especially, we see highly competitive organizations. We worked with a pharma recently. There were folks in one lab who are literally competing with the folks in the next lab over. And so there are situations where even within the same office, the missions are not shared. You're competing for budget, you're competing for sales, and so you need to understand the challenge that that creates within these situations. And then, again, last, we talk about technology. Most organizations aren't where they should be or want to be, but that also shouldn't be considered the greatest limiting factor, because there's a lot you can do with some of the more traditional, older, basic systems on the market if they're designed well. So once we've mapped the where you are to where you want to be, we really have the ability then to create a dialogue around where each of these organizations is potentially behind or ahead. So I mentioned we do this for over 30 factors, 5-point scale, but there's a couple keys to this. A lot of these benchmarks are based on surveys. Ours is not. It's based on observation, meaning that we've actually been in organizations and didn't use the metrics that somebody reported. We used the metrics that we saw as experts. I think that's really key. The other is the recognition that no two organizations are the same. And so I'm going to show you some tiny little screenshots of roadmaps, and you're going to see that they all look different. They all feel different. Some are very agile, some are very waterfall-y, because the only way to make KM make sense is to put it in terms of the language and the business drivers of the organization. As we dig into the benchmark a little bit more. This is based on a traditional bell curve. So most organizations would fall right in the middle. And you can say that most organizations would score between a 2 and a 4, and kind of an average. The folks who are getting 5s on any of these factors likely have put in a huge investment, not necessarily in actual dollars, but absolutely in time. To move up to the top of the spectrum, let's embrace the fact that it's not something that happens naturally. It's not something that happens easily. It requires a very significant investment. So why do you do it? Because it will have a very significant return. And this is the key. Not every organization should score a 5 in every one of these criteria. Not every organization needs to have an amazing capacity to capture social knowledge. Not every organization needs great capabilities to share knowledge via mobile. If you're all in one office and you all know each other, you don't need that. So again, let's ensure that we understand as we move through this day that not everything you're going to hear as a best practice is your best practice. Every organization is unique, and the first question you should be asking is, what do your stakeholders care about? What do they want to be able to do? Because that's what's going to allow you to say, which factors will I get the greatest return on investment from? Which factors will my stakeholders gravitate toward? One of the ways that we do that is through prioritization. Again, Claire's going to talk in greater detail at the end of the day about how we leverage design thinking workshops to plan knowledge management, and a big component of that is the recognition that you can't do it all. And so prioritization, the way that I like to talk about this, and I think it's kind of hard to say, but we talk about 3 factors. 2 are pretty self-explanatory and obvious. One is business value. We do the stuff that will help the most people in the most way first. Second is technical complexity, also pretty obvious, right? If something's pretty easy to do, if it'll take less time and cost less money, let's do it sooner. But the third is the one that I think a lot of organizations miss, and that is its foundational value to the target state. Remember I said you can't build a roadmap if you don't know where you want to go? Well, one of the reasons that target state definition is so important early on is so that you can determine which elements of your plan early on are the ones that will create the foundation that will allow you to do that next cool thing to demonstrate the greater value, to engage your users more. So heavy consideration based on that which allows you to do more and to build upon what you have. A couple examples of this from perhaps a more technical situation are, one is taxonomy, right? If you have a good set of tags and controlled vocabulary, that's going to allow you to pull all your content together and make it more findable right from the start. Another is content cleanup. And again, it doesn't take a lot of fancy tools to do that. It just takes time to leverage your analytics and come up with some processes to clean out old content. Yet another example would be content architecture, defining a set of content types for one of your core systems. That will be the driver for a lot of what you're going to build into the future, and you're creating something that you do it for one system, it can then move to the enterprise pretty quickly. So all of these are those, I like Legos. All of them are those first Lego pieces that you put on the board so that you can build the cooler stuff up top. The road mapping piece, like I said, can look really different. There can be full Gantt charts. Claire, how many rows were in that Gantt chart that we just built? Painful, right? Couple hundred? So there can be deep and detailed waterfall-y Gantt charts that make some of our agilists in the office weep. But sometimes that's what the client needs. There can also be really lightweight touch points, do this, then do this, agile backlogs that allow us to visualize this in a way and set a standard and set a path. There is no single right answer to what a roadmap should look like, as long as it's detailed enough that it's really actionable, that it is focused on things that show value at every step, so that we're not measuring the success of KM in years, but we're measuring it in weeks and months. We did this thing. We get to celebrate that, which allows people to say, oh, I'm seeing value. This isn't the standard old academic KM. You're actually doing something real that's going to help me. And again, Agile when it makes sense. I think Agile and KM go together really well, but again, some organizations simply aren't there, and that's okay. With a couple minutes over, I guess, but I started late, so let's say that was perfect. I think we've got time for a question or two. Does anybody, please, in the back?
In simplest terms, what do you consider the differences between knowledge management and content management? Because when you go back to the office to brief someone on this, you start out with knowledge management, they immediately get lost. If you feed in the words content management, they feel like they have a better understanding.
Totally. So just to repeat it so everybody can hear, and I believe the inference was that I dodged it, so you and I will have words later, but knowledge management versus content management versus information management. How do these things really fit together? So knowledge management, and the greatest way of explaining this is there's really no such thing as a knowledge management software or a knowledge management tool. KM is a collection of different features and functionality and processes, really, that would run the spectrum of being for content or documents or records. So good KM sits on top of content management, document management, and records management, as well as social and learning management in many cases. So I consider KM to be the wrapper for all of those things. But for those organizations that feel like that's too far of a reach for KM, that's why I describe the KIM spectrum, knowledge and information management, where it doesn't really matter where KM stops and information management or content management begins, because good KM encompasses good content management and vice versa. So maybe that is a dodge, but it's the best one I got. One more question. Yeah?
Sure. So we talked here kind of just about initial setup and a one-on-one about what knowledge management actually is. My question delves into what we might get into later today, but I want to ask you because I'm curious what your opinion is.
Sure.
So I want to talk about acceptance, and not just internally, but forward-facing to our clients. Because from an organizational standpoint, we're using knowledge management from the client support area of what we do. And I want to hear what your thoughts are on the old proverb of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink.
Yeah. So this falls into the realm of Kevin Costner, too. If you build it, they will come. They will not. It's no KM project is going to be effective or sticky, as I like to say, without really clear communications, education, and marketing, without a very comprehensive change management plan. And so that goes as much, if not more so, for your external stakeholders as it does for your internal. What does this mean? It means that don't use the term KM. Don't talk about knowledge management. Talk about what your customers will be able to do that they presently can't. The value that will come with their acceptance of the changes, and then ensure that you're investing in the coaching that's going to be necessary to help them break their habits and do something differently. We do change management. I literally own a company that does change management, and I was the last guy to move off of Outlook in my company. I am ashamed, but I admit that fact. Change is hard, and it's not just hard because people are stubborn. It's hard because we learn these habits and we're busy, and it's easiest to do the thing that's most familiar. And so for everyone that you're going to be interacting with, you've got a sales job. And let's call it what it is. It is a sales and marketing job to say, KM will help us. Here is why. Here's why it matters. Yes, there will be a little pain. There will be a little chaos. But let's paint the picture of what we're going to be able to do and why we're making these decisions. To the extent that they can be involved in choosing what you're going to do and why and how those decisions are being made, the more buy-in you're going to get early on. I, as the fancy KM consultant, can talk about this stuff all day long, and by the way, I do. But the most valuable pitch for knowledge management is for a member of your sales team to pitch the rest of the sales team, a member of your HR team to pitch the rest of the HR team. Pull in different features and functions from your organization, pull in a few of your trusted clients, get them as your KM working group, and then allow them to be part of your marketing plan. And as you might guess, we can talk a lot more about this. This is a topic of passion for me. All right, I'm out of time, so thank you, everybody, and look forward to speaking with you throughout the day.